Sorry about that. Let's see.
Hey, Cindy.
Hi, sorry about that. I lost track of time. Okay, so let me get Melinda. I'm not sure who is Gary and Ann, you're presenting, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Kevin, well, let's see, let's promote him to panelist. Okay. Okay. All right, Melinda. Sorry about that, everybody.
That's okay. I'll just go ahead and get it started really quick then. And by introducing and thanking those that are joining. Our board of directors had a special board meeting recently where our engineers, Gary Keeneland and Ann Williams, updated them on the drought conditions. And after hearing that, they directed us to organize a online public meeting so that we can provide some more information as early as possible to all of you regarding the conditions, since they were sounding quite dire. And so with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Ann. You said you're going, or?
Yes, I'm gonna try to share my, Cindy, it looks like you'll have to enable me to share my screen, I think.
Okay. All right. Can you share now?
Yes.
Okay.
Melinda,
real quick, Melinda, did we posted this as a board meeting? So do we? I know Steve is not going to be here, and neither is Justin Van Lovensel's. But do you want to go ahead and have Tom or Jack open the meeting? And
Yeah, you can go ahead and yeah. Is Tom? I saw Tom was on. I didn't.
Yeah, Jack.
Yeah,
I think Jack.
Cindy, I'm on as well, but I will tell you,
perfect.
I tried to dial in on all the phone numbers and could not get through.
Okay.
So for people trying to dial in, that may be a problem. I tried 3 different ones.
All right. Well, I'll keep a look on my email and the phone here, so and try to help people through it if they.
Well, I hope that's not a problem for members of the public, because I have the feeling a lot of people will be calling in.
Okay.
Anyway, do you want me to call the meeting to order?
Yes, please.
I'm calling to order the meeting of the North Delta Water Agency special board meeting of April 27th. An agenda has been distributed, and Cindy, I will let you take it from there.
Okay, well, go ahead, and Ann, I think you can get started with the presentation.
thanks, Linda. You can see this presentation on the screen now, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Gary and I are gonna tag team this. So Gary, just jump in whenever. We're gonna cover several topics today. The first one we're gonna cover is current conditions. So we'll take a look at water supply and water quality. And then we'll talk more specifically about drought, particularly 2021 and related actions this year. with a focus on the North Delta contract and the emergency drought provision within the contract. So the first thing we'll look at here, just in terms of water supply conditions, this is the 4 River Basin Index. So it's the sum of full natural flow for the 4 major rivers in the Sacramento system: Sacramento River at Bend Bridge, Feather River at Orville, Yuba River at Smartsville, and American River at Folsom. And this plot is showing chronologically each year from 1905 up through 2020. And then you'll see on the far right here, we've added a forecasted bar for 2021. And so the colors, there's a lot of colors going on, but they're color coded by the Sacramento Valley year type designation. So the blue bars are wet years, the pink bars are below normal years, the yellow bars are critical years. I guess I could have gone in order here, but the orange bars are dry years and the green bars are above normal years. So we'll just focus everybody on the right-hand side here. So 2020, last year, was it designated a dry year by the Sac Valley Index. And then this year is currently forecasted to be a critical year at the 90% forecast. So that's the dry forecast. In 9 out of 10 years, we would expect that hydrology would come out wetter than that forecast. The 50% forecast is also designating a critical year, and that's the more likely forecast. Equal chances that 10% forecast is a wetter forecast, and you can see that even with that wetter forecast, 2021 would still be designated a below normal year. So things are looking pretty dry. This is the same information, just sorted instead in order instead of chronologically. And so you'll see we've got the forecasts called out here in red near the left-hand side. And so you can just see where those fall historically. If we track the April 1st 90%, that drier forecast, you can see that in terms of the 4 River Basin Index, it comes out pretty low. The 4th lowest in the historical record that we're showing here. The other piece we'll talk quickly about is California snow water content. So the dark blue line here is showing the current conditions. The top plot is for Northern California, the middle plot is for Central California, and the bottom plot is for Southern California. And this is snow water content as a percent of the April 1 average. So you can see that currently in Northern California, we're about 21% of the April 1st average, which is about 27% of normal. So in terms of snow, things are also pretty dry in that snowpack and dropping as we would expect as things start to warm up and snow is starting to melt. In terms of surface water storage, this graphic is showing a lot of the major reservoirs in California. And what you'll see consistently across all of the reservoirs in Northern California compared to the historical average, that red line in each of the reservoir plots are current storage. The blue line is well below the historical average. So for example, Lake Orville, which will be a focus of a lot of what we talk about today, we're at 42% of capacity right now and only 53% of the historical average. So currently that's pretty consistent across the state. Lake Shasta, our other major reservoir, is a little bit better than Lake Orville. But if you look at Folsom, our other big system here, Folsom is pretty low in terms of capacity and historical average as well. We'll focus in a little bit more on Orville since that's what applies most to North Delta. The dark blue line here is current conditions, and it's comparing storage in Lake Orville compared to a couple of other years. The red line here is water year 1976 to 1977. So you can see that currently we are a little bit above where we were during that historic drought. But then when you look at Oroville conditions compared to 2014 or 2015, the green bar, the green line or the blue line, you can see that current Oroville storage is below storage from both of those years, which are more of our current, more recent drought reference points that we've been hearing a lot about. So storage at Oroville is pretty low. So in terms of what all this means for water supply, the State Water Resources Control Board sent warning notices to all water right holders in the state back in March. And the notices were to notify water right holders that they should be prepared for drought impacts statewide. So there was no action with that notice. It was just a warning notice sent to all water right holders that things were dry and that the drought impacts were likely coming. The other piece is for term 91. So this is a term that's in junior water right permits in the Sacramento Valley. And they're really for water rights that are junior to the project operations at Shasta, Oroville, Folsom by the Bureau of Reclamation and DWR. So this term protects stored water releases by the projects so that water right holders are not diverting that previously stored water that they are not entitled to. Typically, we see term 91 implemented in the summer of almost every year. Oftentimes, term 91 curtailments are imposed earlier in the spring when it's dry. So they are likely this spring. It's probably the first level of curtailment we'll see, and it's probably going to come pretty soon. And it's really just an indicator for potential other curtailments later in the season in really dry years. So currently, the conditions do exist to implement term 91 curtailments as of a couple of days ago. So we may be seeing notices from the state board come out to water right holders who do have term 91. In terms of state water project allocations, so this is DWR's project from Oroville. The Feather River settlement agreements are the senior water right holders on the Feather River system. So they have received notice that they have a 50% reduction for the water from Oroville under their agreements for this year. And that's the maximum reduction that they can receive under their contracts. In addition, the State Water Project has allocated only 5% of its Table A contract quantities. So allocations on the State Water Project side are pretty minimal this year. On the CVP side, by the Bureau of Reclamation, allocations to the Sacramento River settlement contractors. Those are the senior water right holders on the Sacramento River. Similar to those Feather River settlement agreements, they have been reduced to a 75% contract supply. It's been a Shasta critical year designation this year, so those contracts are shorted by 25%. The CVP discretionary contracts are at pretty minimal allocations as well. The north of Delta Ag is at 5%, south of Delta Ag is at 0%, and M&I is at 55%. In terms of water quality within North Delta, the North Delta contract has water quality compliance locations. And these are all locations that we monitor and track with criteria that are calculated based on the contract, which does take into account current conditions. And so you can see on the map here, these black dots, these are the compliance locations under the contract where we're looking at water quality. We're going to show just a couple of plots. We won't look at all the stations. We'll look at 2 of the key stations where we typically see water quality issues first. So the first one will be the Sacramento River at 3 Mile Slough. So this graphic is showing from December of 2020 through the end of May. And the red line here is the water quality criteria based on the contract. And again, this is calculated based on DWR's forecasts. What you see in the blue line here is the 14-day average EC at 3 Mile Slough. And so you can see that the blue line here for all of the years so far has been tracking quite a bit lower than that contract criteria. So in terms of water quality, DWR is meeting the water quality standard under the contract at this location for this year so far. We're also showing, just as a reference point, the green line, that's Sacramento River at Edmonton. That was the prior water quality compliance location before it was adjusted to 3 Mile Slough. But you can see here in late April, we are well in compliance with the 2.72 microsiemens per centimeter under the contract. The other key location we'll look at today, this is the Sacramento River at Rio Vista. Again, the story is largely the same for this year. And so far into this season, our actual water quality, that 14-day average, which is what the contract is based on, is quite a bit better than the water quality criteria under the contract. I think I might have mentioned everything on this slide already, but the North Delta contract criteria, those red lines, those are based on the 14-day mean EC. This is different than daily or hourly EC. That EC fluctuates with tides. And so conditions, especially for farmers and water use, should be monitored closely, especially as tides rise and bring in more salinity. So just because we're meeting the contract criteria on the 14-day mean doesn't necessarily mean that the water quality is adequate for crops at certain periods or at certain points in the day. We did just want to remind folks that the water quality data we look at is available publicly on DWR's CDEC website. And so any of these stations can be searched and you can see more real-time data. This data is showing hourly data, and you can see the variation in the peaks from those tidal cycles. Again, there's a lot of available data for folks who are interested or want to track things a bit closer. Water quality, flow, elevation or stage, velocity, all of these things are available through CDEC or the state's water data library. And then there's also additional information that's available through the USGS website. In terms of potential drought-related actions for this year, the projects DWR and the Bureau have prepared a drought contingency plan for March 1st through September 30th of this year. This is something that's required by DWR's ITP with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, so that governs their operations of the state water project. This plan was prepared based on February 1 forecasts, so it's a bit outdated. And I'll just mention that since the February 1st forecasts have come out, we've really been tracking drier, so more along the 90% exceedance forecast, or even a little bit below. So just keep that in mind, that we are tracking a bit drier than those forecasts. So this plan is slightly outdated. But the modeling in that plan assumes that DWR will meet the North Delta contract criteria under both the 50% and the 90% that drier exceedance forecast. Under the 50% forecast, which again might be too optimistic for us to think a whole lot about right now, but both the CVP and SWP anticipated that they would meet all of their in-basin requirements and D1641 standards. They did have identified potential concerns for 2022 if drier critical conditions continued. Maybe more appropriately, since we have been tracking closer to the 90% forecast through the drought contingency plan, it identified that the D1641 standards did allow for some flexibility in terms of meeting X2. So that's a delta outflow standard and water quality requirements that the projects need to meet. And therefore the projects were not going to plan to submit a temporary urgency change petition. So that's something that's a bit different than 2014 and 2015. So there's not that indication this year of them submitting a petition to the state board to modify the water quality standards. The 90% forecast does identify some concerns relative to temperature management and carryover storage. So again, this plan's a little bit outdated. We're expecting to see an addendum to that plan this week. So that'll include some updated forecast information that should be based on the April 1 DWR's most recent forecast. And then following DWR's May forecast, the projects have identified that they'll do an updated drought contingency plan. So that'll be a full update of the plan. So a bit more information than just the addendum, and that's likely to be released in late May. Most folks may have seen or read about the governor's proclamation of a drought emergency for the Russian River watershed that occurred last week. But at this time, there has not been any type of similar proclamations for the Sacramento or Delta watersheds. Gary, do you want to add anything else on current conditions or jump into North Delta contract?
No, I think you covered all that pretty well. If you want me to talk about the contract, I'm happy to do that, but maybe we could stop there and just kind of see if there's any questions on what Ann's presented to this point.
If anybody has any questions, you can use the raise your hand button and I'll allow you to, I can open up you to ask the question, or you can use the question and answer. I think it's at the bottom of your screen, either way, just, or chat, either way. I don't see anybody.
Don't see anything? Okay, well, we'll move on then and certainly have time for questions either by the board or others when we conclude here. Just as a reminder, the North Delta contract, as Ann's been talking about, assures a dependable supply of good quality water for use within the agency. The intention of the contract is to protect the lands within North Delta from ocean salinity intrusion, allows for continued diversions during curtailment periods. So if and when the State Water Board issues curtailments to your water right permits or licenses, because of the contract, the lands within North Delta can continue to divert water even during their curtailment periods. The other thing is that the contract provides for salinity standards at those 7 locations that Ann's showed earlier. But there's salinity standards at those locations year round. D1641 and the Water Quality Control Plan have salinity standards, for example, at Edmonton, the Sacramento River to Edmonton, which we looked at a couple of minutes ago. However, that salinity standard only runs through mid-August, and then there's a period where there's not a specific salinity standard at that location and between mid-August to the 1st of April. There are other standards that do protect quality, but there's not a specific salinity standard at Edmonton. Other protections of the contract, the contract protects the lands within the agency from changes in natural flows, flow directions, and water surface elevations, also from erosion and seepage that would be caused by the operation of the state water project.
Hey, Gary, real quick, we did have one question. I'm sorry. There's a gentleman named Tom. You should be unmuted to go ahead and ask your question. Okay. Okay, well, I guess he doesn't.
So the person might need to unmute their computer as
Yeah.
well.
Okay. All right, well, I guess we can go ahead and move forward. They're not responding. So,
Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll move on. The contract does contain a drought emergency provision, and that's identified in Article 4 of the contract, and we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail now. Go ahead again. Okay. Article 4 provides that when a drought emergency exists, and we'll talk about what those requirements for a drought emergency is under the contract. But when a drought emergency exists, the state can provide for either an alternative water supply, or if an alternative supply is not available, there's provisions for the state to provide compensation for loss of income due to the choice to plant to a more salt tolerant crop, to choose not to plant a crop at all, or for crops that have reduced yields. And so a drought emergency exists, and these are as defined in the contract. For a drought emergency to exist pursuant to the contract, 3 conditions have to exist. 1, the Fort River Index, or the Sacramento River Index, which Shan was showing us earlier, has to be below an average in 2 consecutive years, has to be below an average of 9 million acre feet. The second condition that has to exist, and all of these have to exist concurrently. The second one is for state water project ag contractors are allocated less than 50% of their contract supplies. And the third condition is that the State Water Board has implemented an emergency regulation that allows the state water project to operate in such a way to meet water quality that's different than that provided under the contract. So Ann explained and described the Fort River or the Sacramento River Index. It's the actual or forecasted unimpaired inflow for the 4 rivers as Ann identified previously. So I'm not going to spend much time here. And so where we are with those three conditions, the Fort River Basin Index, based on the April 1 Bulletin 120 forecast, the 50% exceedance forecast was for 8 million acre feet. When we look at water year 2020, last year, the actual SRI was 9.7, which results in a 2-year average of 8.85. So we are below an average of 9 million acre feet based on the April 1 forecast this year. So that criteria has been met for a drought emergency. The second one is, as Anna indicated earlier, the state water project allocations for ag contractors are 5% based on the March 23rd announcement for contractors. Therefore, we're below 50%, and that part of the criteria has also been met. Currently, however, the State Water Board has not implemented any emergency standards that, or allowed for any modifications to the water quality standards. So that piece, that third piece of the criteria has not been met, and therefore, based on the terms of the contract, a drought emergency does not currently exist. Now that could change in the future if things stay dry, and we'll have to continue to monitor those conditions. And if the State Water Board implements some emergency regulation that allows for other standards, then the drought emergency provisions could kick in later this year, but we'll have to keep track of that. So what those emergency provisions, if a drought emergency does end up coming into play this year, it allows for the Department of Water Resources to implement a special contract claims procedure to expedite and facilitate payment for the compensation, such as I described a minute ago. Claims procedure does require significant records and information be provided to the state. So I think where we are right now is the agency and agency staff is in light of conditions and with the possibility that we could see emergency provisions. I think it would be good for folks to start collecting or collect as we go through this year the various records and information that may be required if a claims procedure is established by the state. Go ahead, Ann. The information that would be required to be completed with a claim or submitted with a claim would include, current year crop information, crop type, acreage, when the crop was planted, when it was harvested. You want to keep track of receipts and invoices for crops and the other farming things that you need to do to grow your crops. Changes in yields, timing and quantity of irrigations, information on soil salinity, water quality data. And as far as crop history, they will want to go back 5 years and look at average yields and cropping patterns and things like that to compare with this year in order to establish your claim. They also will be looking for crop insurance information. If you have crop insurance, they will want to see those records as well.
Hey, Gary, I think Jack had a question. Is there a cutoff date by the State Water Quality Control Board that must make their declaration of the drought, or not?
No, there is not. Under the contract, there's no language there in the contract that says a drought emergency has to be declared by such and such a date. So, to the extent that they are meeting the water quality criteria through, the majority of the year, if a drought emergency, and maybe this addresses your question, Jack, if a drought emergency is declared, say in October of this year, maybe there's, that would probably limit the lands that could be included in a claim for this year, for 2021. So let's see, go ahead, Ann. The other thing we would point out is based on past experience, the claims take a significant amount of time to process. Claims were submitted. We did have the last time we had a claims procedure in place was 2015, and it took a good year for those claims to be processed and for payments to be made. If there are disputes regarding the claims, if you disagree with with the determination made by the State Water Board, or I'm sorry, by the Department of Water Resources in your claim. The claims procedure will include those disputes would be settled through a binding arbitration process, and that binding arbitration process would involve a three-person or a three-party panel to review the claim and the disputes. The three parties, as identified, would be a representative from the Department of Water Resources, a representative from the agency, somebody the agency chooses to represent, and then an independent third party would be the third person that would be involved in that arbitration panel that would review and settle any sorts of disputes should they arise in a claim. So we've, what's next? The agency and staff, certainly Ann and I will continue to monitor conditions closely. The agency will take appropriate action based on changing conditions and circumstances. We are coordinating regularly with DWR and their operations staff so that we can disseminate information on a timely basis as things change, whether there are changing conditions or releases, flows, and other things. So the agency plans to disseminate information to landowners, essentially through correspondence with the various reclamation districts. That's the easiest way for the agency to disseminate information to landowners, and also through postings on the agency's website as appropriate. If appropriate down the road, the agency has talked about holding public meetings such as we did back in 2014 and 2015. So with that, I think that concludes the presentation we plan to give, Ann and I. Again, we are happy to address any questions from the board or others.
Well, Ann and Gary, thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any questions or comments from the public?
Okay, someone has raising their hand. Harvey Carrera, I'm gonna go ahead and allow you to talk. Go ahead, Harvey. You'll need to unmute Harvey.
Okay, I think I got it now. Yeah, sorry. I'm using a phone. I'm in Virginia, so I am doing it remotely. In 2015, I was one of the few that filed a claim, and I have pretty good memory that the biggest delay in the claim process was the development of a claim process. And after I submitted my claim, there was a problem. They returned my form back because it wasn't signed by Melinda yet, even though at our meeting there in Walnut Grove, it was decided that they would all be signed there in Sacramento. And so after that was submitted, they said they would approve or decide on my claim within 30 days. And they did take a little bit more than 30 days, and I wrote them and they said that, they were still in compliance, but they weren't, but they did approve it. So it wasn't too long. And I'm just wondering if they would likely use the same claim process as in 2015.
This is Melinda. Thanks, Harvey. I think that was good input and a good question. I can't answer for sure, yes or no, but I will say that I actually yesterday did talk to DWR about it, because as Gary said, 2 out of the 3 criteria in the contract have been met so far. And so I asked them that question. They didn't have the answer, but we essentially had the discussion though that, and I pointed out to them that, well, they, need to look at that 2015 process that they did develop. Luckily, it was fairly recent. And to get ready, essentially, because I said the moment you've met the third criteria, then that comes into play, and the sooner that they're ready this time, the better. So I guess my answer would be, I don't know yet, but at least we have put them on notice to re-look at the process they developed and determine whether they're fine with that going forward, or to start making the changes now that they would want to present. And so the good news is we have talked to them and asked them to really get ready for that. And the moment it would get triggered, then they would immediately have a public meeting like they did back then to explain and go through the claims process that they decide on. So it could be the same, or they might have some tweaks to it. We don't know yet.
Okay, am I still unmuted?
No, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've never used water diversion and storage before, and I'm wondering if that's something that I might want to do this year, because I'm surprised that we're worse than we were in 2015, or projected to be worse. And so, is there any restriction on that?
I will let Gary answer that.
Harvey, I'm not sure I understood your question. Are you asking whether you can divert water and store it?
Yes, that's correct.
Well, I would say that, and Kevin O'Brien, I think, is on the line as well. Your water rights, I don't believe, if you have a direct diversion water right permit or license, that would not allow for you to divert and store water. Storage is also not allowed under a riparian right. Those rights are for direct diversion. That means you take water out of the channel and you put it to use. There is some level, typically a direct diversion right. There's some opportunity to regulate flow, which would essentially you could divert a little bit more than you needed immediately. But you certainly can't hold water for more than 30 days without putting it to use under the water rights that are typically available in the Delta. I'm personally not aware of any storage rights in the Delta area offhand.
Yeah, and you probably remember some of my testimony before that there were cases where I'd have to turn a pump off for 4 hours and turn it back on. And so I'm not looking at long-term storage, but if we end up with periods in August in particular where we're going to have some high tides at a particular part of the month, that may I want to store water to get me through that period.
Right, and I think Harvey, I think that type of an operation, I think is and again, if Kevin has different thoughts, I would invite him to offer those. But I would think that would be allowed, to take additional water during a high tide or a low tide cycle, so that you had it to get you through the high tide cycle when the salinity is worse. I think that would fall within the quote regulation of water that is allowed under a direct diversion right. That would not be a storage of water as it's defined by the water board.
This is Kevin. I would agree with Gary on that.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay, does anybody else have any more questions? I haven't gotten any on the chat or no more raised hands, but anybody is welcome to ask questions.
This is Melinda. if nobody's gonna ask any more questions, I just wanted to reinforce a couple of things for folks from the presentation that you heard, because I think they relate to everything that we will all be seeing in the news moving forward. And just want to be clear that one is, as was mentioned, right now the governor has only declared what he's calling a regional, or done a proclamation for a regional drought for the Russian River watershed. But our contract is independent from any declaration by the governor. So even if he never declares a statewide drought, if the third criteria in our emergency drought provision is met, then our contract comes into play regardless of whether he does a statewide declaration or not. And as was mentioned by Ann, just want to be clear, you know, in the future, for those of you that also have any appropriative water rights and you receive curtailment letters, the curtailment applies to that particular water right, but you are allowed to continue diverting under the North Delta Water Agency contract. And you know, we're likely to have more information, you know, that will, as Gary said, we may have future public meetings to talk about that if we get to that point in this drought. But at the time, you know, when those have previously come out, you can continue to divert under North Delta Water Agency contract, but usually the paperwork you receive requires you to submit paperwork back to the water board declaring that you're going to use your North Delta water rights. And it is important for everyone to turn that paper back in to the water board if curtailments are eventually issued. So I think those are just things that I wanted to make sure that everyone is clear in their mind that, you know, essentially the contract will operate as a drought insurance policy that allows you to continue to divert. But as, you know, Gary and Ann talked about, and Harvey really, because he remembers well, is that the water quality in the Delta, because of tides, you know, is very different on a daily basis and may require, you know, the alteration of when you're actually diverting the water. And that's the end of my concluding comments on the presentation.
Melinda, this is Jack. To your last point about people getting notices to curtail, but obviously still having the right to divert under our North Delta Water Agency contract, that certainly could be confusing to somebody on the ground. What are the best resources for those people if they have questions on that to get those answered at the time?
Well, certainly, you know, if curtailment letters are eventually issued, then, you know, we can put on our website, they can call us, of course, and we do. And that's when we tend to start getting a lot of phone calls and questions, is when those letters, if they are eventually sent out by the water board. But we can put information on our website reminding people that even, again, that they receive that paperwork. It does require them to send information back to the water board, but that they can continue diverting. We can have that information posted on the website.
Great, thank you. And that is a perfect segue into my next question, which is obviously the North Delta Water Agency website is a great resource for people to go to have their questions answered on this issue. Will there be links on that website, or some way to point people to other things that will be helpful for them?
Yes, I just yesterday started building a new drought section on the first page of our website. And after we conclude here today, then I'll be posting both this PowerPoint presentation and another one that our engineers gave recently at another special board meeting. And I'm going to start adding in some really good links to the other websites. So for instance, so that people could click on and get over to the CDEC database that Ann mentioned earlier. And the water, and it'll have a link to the water board has a new drought page, and DWR has a new drought page. And that way those links will be there, because certainly both the water board and DWR, of course, will, you know, be updating with any news on curtailments, and in particular for DWR, changes in the conditions as the new forecasts come out.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments from the public, or do any of our staff or experts have any more that they want to add?
This is Cindy. I am going to be posting this presentation on our website for all of our attendees and also the public. So it'll be this whole recorded session. So just as a heads up, I'll try to get it up by the end of the day. There'll probably be a link to a YouTube video on there that the public can access.
Well, if there's nothing else, shall we adjourn the meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Then thank you all very much for attending, both our experts and our staff and everybody in the public that has chosen to attend. This is obviously a very important topic. We appreciate your participation. So with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.